channel. This is gonna be a video on how to play with time and space in Bitwig Studio by manipulating the beat grid. I'll first go through some basics of how it works, and then some lesser known functions, and then some ways you can kind of manipulate it and break out of it. So the very basics: you've got your BPM at the top here, you've got your time signature below. The BPM is how often this note value, so in this case a quarter note, repeats. So we've got 185 quarter notes every minute. Then you've got your snapping option in the bottom right. This is this kind of line with two arrows to either side of it. If you turn this on, clips or notes you drag will always kind of land on the BPM grid. You can see you can place them in between here, these two grid lines, but once you get close there, you can see how it kind of jumps to the grid line. If you turn this off, it stops doing that, so you can just place it freely. So if you want to write something without a time signature, you can turn this off. Another thing, if you hold Shift, you will kind of change how this behaves. So if I hold Shift while it's turned on, my sample won't snap anywhere. And if I hold Shift while it's turned off, my sample will still snap anywhere. So you can kind of bypass this button's current setting by using the Shift key. Then we've got all these options here. Now these options are pretty great. I really like them. There's a lot you can do with this. So first of all, adaptive grid means the grid size kind of changes as you zoom in or out. You can see how it gets finer and finer and doesn't really stop changing if I turn it on, and if I turn it off, it doesn't get finer if I zoom in. This is quite useful to have. Then you can kind of set the grid intervals. So right now every bar there's a new grid line. If I turn this up or down, I can have a grid line every half note, every quarter note, every 16th notes, and so on. You can also change this by hitting plus and comma. So plus makes it more coarse, and if I hit comma here, you can see how it's getting finer. Then we've got the let's turn the snapping on again here. Then we've got the straight. Then we've got triplets, quintuplets, and septuplets. These are named quintole and septole, which I just know these as the German names for them. I had no idea these words also exist in English. I mostly hear these by triplets, quintuplets, septuplets in English. So yeah, in case you were confused by that, that's just a different word for the same thing. You can also change this if you hold Alt and hit plus or minus. You can change between these tuplets. So if I hit not plus or minus, comma and dot. So if I hold Alt and hit dot, I go to triplets, to quintuplets, to septuplets, and cycle back to normal. These two in combinations are really powerful because you'll probably, as you zoom in and out in your project, want to change your grid size a lot to kind of work precisely, but also if you zoom out, not have to find a grid. And just knowing that comma and dot, getting into the habit of using these shortcuts can really make you a lot faster and a lot more flexible. Also Alt dot to kind of move through these tuplets here. Then next we've got some really cool options here. So snap to grid is just standard naive. Wherever there's a grid line, the sample is gonna snap to. Now then we've got snap to grid offset, and this is kind of interesting. You can turn on multiple of these, but I'm just gonna turn on one for now. So if I've got this set to grid offset, you can see I placed the sample off this grid a bit by just using my Shift key here and kind of bypassing the grid temporarily. If I now take this sample and drag it elsewhere, it's not going to snap to the grid line. It's going to snap to the place it was relative to the grid line. So you can see here, if it is a few milliseconds behind the grid line, it's gonna snap to, see it jumping here, it's a few milliseconds behind this grid line. So if I've got like, let me turn on grid and grid offset in combination, because this is usually the more useful way of using them. So if I've got like a swung beat, so I've got this sample here and then I've got a second one that's off, I can kind of drag this here and it'll snap to the grid. while holding Control to copy it. And then I want to copy this. And I can make it not only snap to the grid, but also snap to its offset, so I can keep working for another bar in this swing. And this again then snaps to the amount of milliseconds is what it was behind that. So that's a really neat little feature for just kind of creating these off-grid kinds of beats. And there's another feature for that, which is really nice, which is snap to events, my personal favorite. So here, instead of snapping to these lines, these BPM lines, it's going to snap to nearby starts and stops of audio events. So if I drag this onto a new channel, you can see it kind of snaps to this sample in the channel above. And if I drag it here, it snaps to this sample in the channel above. And if I move this here, and then I drag this nearby once again, it snaps to this. So you can kind of create your own grids and beats with this, which is really nice. So yeah, this little menu is something you really should know. Also these hotkeys of plus, not plus and minus, sorry, I'm keep repeating the wrong ones. Dot to make it bigger, comma to make it smaller, holding Alt while doing that to cycle through the tablets. There we go. Holding Shift to temporarily bypass the snapping, so either turn snapping off when it's on, or turn snapping on when it's off. And then these options here you've got. So let's turn snapping on again. Then something else you should definitely know is that, of course, you can automate the BPM. You do this in the master channel here by clicking the BPM, and you can see here transport, tempo, and then you can kind of input your own BPM values. One neat little trick that if you want to kind of automate these with a MIDI controller or just with an automation lane is, the problem with this BPM automation is it goes really low to 20 BPM and really high to 666 BPM, which is, I don't know if it's intended as an Easter egg, but it's kind of funny. So you can instead get a global project macro here, so create a macro modulator, and then, for example, set this to bipolar, map this to the BPM, and set the depth to maybe 20. And now you've got an automation lane for your BPM that just goes from 165 to 205 in my case, which kind of makes more precise control and less drastic weird shifts to 666 BPM to 20 BPM not possible, because you kind of limit your range here this way. So this is a nice little trick that I find useful if I just want to do some BPM automation on maybe a classical piece where I just wanted to ebb and flow a bit in speed and don't want any drastic changes or precise values. It's more just about the gesture of having it go fast here and then a bit slower here, limiting this by using a macro modulator and mapping this to this BPM is really useful. Then you can also change time signature, but you don't do that with automation. You do that by right-clicking on the top here and clicking Insert Time Signature Change, and you can see here I can now go to, I don't know, 7, 8 or whatever time signature you want to use in your math rock inspired neuro hop song or whatever you make. That's how you do that. You can place these on top here. Now, what else did I want to get through? Time signature automation. And then there are some tricks I wanted to show you. So the first trick I kind of want to show you is that often in arrangements you've got a section that's kind of structured in 8 bars or whatever. Here you can see here this kind of block of time, and then you've got a bit of an interlude or like a breakdown or just like a drum fill that's like an extra bar, and then you continue your song, but it kind of starts getting offbeat because it's shifted by this time signature change. So you can see how my arrangement here continues in regular blocks like this and this and this, but because I've got this little fill in between here, this is offbeat now. Now I can kind of reset the counting of these grid lines by just inserting a time signature change, and I won't actually change the time signature. I just want to have let me just zoom in enough here. insert a time signature change, and you can see how it kind of, now if I zoom out, we've kind of got this smaller substructure here, where this is just my little fill thing, my little crash sound effect thing, and then these bits here that are structured at normal 4-bar loops again are kind of on beat again. Once again here I've got like one section stops, another starts, but the other starts with some delay. So I put in a time signature change here so that I can kind of reset the counting on these grid lines here, which just as we zoom out, you can kind of see how that makes it here a bit more manageable and a bit easier to kind of keep track, and also to, when moving these sections around, using like a really coarse grid value like every 8 bars and then snapping to these. So this kind of time signature change just to reset counting and have like a few uneven bars in your arrangement here and there without actually changing time signature is something I find really useful together with these arrangement markers. Now, a second little trick I like to use sometimes is that when you use a drum break or some other drum sample that has its own kind of groove to it, you can see here if I hit comma a few times, none of these are really perfectly on grid. If I listen to this, you can hear there's a kind of swing to it. And I want to write some other drums to this. But if I just snap these on grid, these will kind of not fit with this drum sample. So what instead you can do is you can set this to snap to events only. And then what you do is you right click this and click slice and place, so it slices on transient. So every new transient gets turned into a new event. And now if I want to write like additional hi-hats for this drum break or something, I can use this drum break as my grid instead of using this more mathematical precise grid. So if I drag the splash around now, you can see how I can snap it to where these drums actually play instead of my time grid, which is a really useful trick for kind of stealing the grooves of different drum breaks and working around off-grid swings, but still having the precision of exactly snapping your transients to each other. So yeah, that's all the stuff I have to say for now about BPM grids and kind of ways to make them work for you and not be as much attached to them, and kind of reset them, work off grid for a bit, then insert a time signature change to get your grid back, still have maximum precision when placing your samples, but also maximum flexibility while working with the grid. So yeah, I hope you enjoy that. See you in the next one.